insights. It is so hard to believe that this content experiment that started off with just 3 people in a Twitter Spaces room has evolved into a regular podcast that consistently gets more than 700 listeners per episode. I am so appreciative of your support. So happy to continue to provide value to this community. And to celebrate this milestone, it would really mean a lot to me if you would subscribe to our show through YouTube or anywhere where you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. We have a great episode this week. It is part 2 of our international SMB series. And this week we are focusing on Canada specifically. My guests are Jessica Cullen, a traditional searcher and professional triathlete, and Scott Duke, the founder and lead M&A advisor at Open Road, a Canada-focused sell-side advisory firm. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining me on the pod.
Yeah, Josh,
thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start off with each of you briefly telling the listeners about your work, your angle in the search community, and what you believe the key ingredient is that leads to strong relationships between the buy and sell sides in a search transaction. I've got the buy side and the sell side on either side of me here virtually, so this is going to be a fun one. Scott, why don't you get started?
Oh, I don't know. I think we do ladies first. Jessica.
Ladies first. There we go. Let's do it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, that's a lot. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. But like Josh mentioned, I'm a traditional searcher. So managing partner of a company called Regenerative Capital Group. It's based in Campbell River, BC, and I'm one of 5 CEO in residences, relatively new searcher. So I started my journey at the beginning of this year. And I'm really excited. One of the things that is a little bit different about the way that we're approaching the search is the companies we ultimately acquire. We will have social impact metrics. So we have that regenerative angle, which is a really purpose-driven search for me, which is why I was really excited to partner with Regenerative on that. And yeah, I'm looking specifically in Ontario and then Western Canada. Scott has told me all about the beautiful mountains, and I think that that's a big draw for me. And then in terms of what leads to strong relationships between the buy and sell sides, I think honestly, you can't get past the trust. Like, I think it's just going in and being completely authentic. I don't ever go into a meeting with an owner and not be myself, because I think that if you are anything other than that, they will, if they're going after a perfectly shiny, no quirks, no nothing, then you're the wrong buyer for them if that's not who you are. So I just go in fully honest about who I am, upfront about what I'm looking for in a company. I always find that first meeting is a lot of a get to know you, because are you a cultural fit? And then you go from there. And then that sets the stage for the rest of the acquisition.
Awesome. That's a great answer. And Scott, thanks for you calling me out as usual. The American on the pod is the rudest one. So I apologize, Jessica. Scott, what about you?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been doing this for 10 years, like helping people sell their businesses. I've had 11 myself, all small companies. Some of these things, as we know in this space, will not sell. That's just the reality. I've lived those. And then it took a while as an entrepreneur just to get to a company to the point where it was sellable. So as about company 5, it took me to figure that out to make a sellable asset. I'd give a shout out to John Warlow, and he's built the sell book, who was helpful for me to unlock that a little bit in the beginning and start my journey. But anyhow, so I've been doing this now for 10 years, helping other entrepreneurs crack the code there. And we have a small team of 9. And again, we're based in British Columbia here in Canada, but I have advisors. I have 15 advisors that are spread across North America. So we've got a lot of advisors throughout the US as well. But that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. On the search side, we actually will help people go out and buy businesses. And we're going to talk about it today. But normally we're working with private equity, or we're working with larger organizations that are buying more than one company at a time. And they're looking to do roll-up strategies and consolidations. So we do a lot of that work as well. But I'll echo Jessica's answer that it really is a trust piece, right? I feel like for me, it's understanding the other side first, regardless if we're working buy side, sell side, understanding what their goals and objectives are. Money's always part of it, of course, but I'm really trying to dig more into their why. I meet a lot of searchers, to be honest with you, and they haven't really dug into that and found that spot yet. So I feel like I can be helpful with them with that, because I've done so much of this in my life, being an entrepreneur and then also finding companies for other people. But that's a big piece of it. It's like, okay, what are you actually trying to achieve here? Because this company may not be the right fit for you, and that's okay. But it's really building the long-term relationship with someone, even if they're only buying one company, they're going to be doing business in the future, and getting that trust out of the way first, like making sure that that's there. So anyway, yeah, that's what I would say from a starting perspective.
Fantastic. And it's funny because I sent y'all just a couple of key topics on Monday, and then on Tuesday sat down and found myself wanting to write a blog post about personalization in the search process. And I didn't put two and two together that I've been thinking about this for a week and a half until I asked this question just now. So really thinking about, how do searchers present themselves to the sell side, to a seller? What are some of the key ways that both of you have found are most successful in terms of helping you stand out and getting yourself sort of to that next phase of, okay, I've signed the NDA, I have the SIM, okay, my questions are being attended to, I'm able to meet the seller. Like, what's sort of the best way to present yourself and stand out in that process?
I can jump in on that.
Please.
I think that you hit the nail on the head in personalization. I was actually just chatting on the phone with an owner yesterday. We've continued the conversation. I always keep the lead warm. I always say no is just an invitation. And I've actually built great friendships with the owners that say, not right now, but keep following up. You better believe I'm going to follow up. So yesterday I had a follow-up conversation. And one thing is that I'm finding these owners I'm building relationships with are actually forwarding me emails from other searchers and saying, can you believe that this is like, I'm never responding to this. And so I understand that search is a numbers game, but I also really understand, for me to stand out, I take the time, because for me, I always look at also what's a regenerative search. And a big part of that is that connection. So a couple things. I always personalize my emails. It takes a lot longer, but I don't send out wild templates. I always research the business, I research the owner, and I take the time. It's a lot more time, but it works. My response rates works, and I've done the A/B testing to see what works. The other thing, and it's something as small as, I was on a call with an owner and it needed to be a video call. But one of the last things he said before we ended the call, he's like, can I ask you a question? He's like, have you set up your computer so that you're looking me right in the eyes? And I was like, oh, I said, oh no, I have a communications background. So I understand that that's a really important part. And so finding those ways to connect, if you can't get right in front of them, what are those small things you can do? Even the difference of like looking in the webcam to make sure that you're looking straight at them builds that trust. Exactly. It makes a difference. So understanding the small psychology there. And then honestly, it just goes back to being yourself. Like, you can't replace just that pure authenticity. And I feel like that's how I stand out. I don't try to make myself who the owner wants to be to buy the business. I just show up as me, and often owners will connect with that. I don't know if this is the right mindset or not, but I'm like, if I can just get in front of them and have them meet me, they're going to want to sell me their business. So whether that's right or wrong, but owners will send me photos of their grandkids, or send me their rules of business. And it's just taking that time to really care. My first meeting is always just getting to know them as a human being. I always say that even if in my first meeting, I need to spend 90% of that meeting connecting with them rather than caring, like coming with my list of questions, that's time well worth it, because this is all about relationships in the very end.
Yeah. Yeah, you're knocking it out of the park right now. Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not looking at whatever. Yeah.
You're doing great, Scott.
Yeah, I know. For us, it is a volume game at the end of the day, like a little bit. Like in the beginning, it's a volume game. And what we've found through failure, which is the best way to learn, is, and I think this is maybe where some searchers don't knock it out of the park, because I talk to a lot of searchers as well that are, trying to build a relationship with us as brokers to have business going to them, is they haven't refined that search enough for themselves. And this is where, the example I gave, I was actually talking to Jessica yesterday, I think, one of your partners there.
Shout out to Lisa Cashmore.
Yeah, totally. And when I was in 2021, all I'm trying to do the same thing every searcher is trying to do. It's like find business owners that want to sell. That's what I'm trying to do every day. It's like who's buying it, not as important, but it's like find someone to sell and then find the buyer. But either way, so we're out there trying to find buyers, and I had this idea. I'm going to do this event, and we're going to put an event together called the Exit Plan Summit. And it took a lot of work. It was 6 months, and we had 700 business owners on this. It was like prime COVID. all online. Like Josh, you understand the work it takes to get that many people.
Unbelievable. Like that's crazy.
Ridiculous.
Very impressive. Yeah.
We had 30 speakers, like blah, 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 like way too much work, right? I converted 0 business out of that, like actually 0, if it's even imaginable. Anyway, so the diagnosis of it was we were very broad. It's like it was great for all the business owners. They learned a lot, but the broadness of it was, okay, I don't care where you're from, anywhere in the world. I don't care the size of your business. Doesn't matter any size. Like really always looking for is, do you have interest in like preparing your business to sell? So there was no targeting to it. I learned a lot about, marketing, online marketing, getting people out to events and that kind of stuff, but it didn't really convert. And that kind of moved into and kind of is a failure that resonated and stuck with me, obviously, of if we're going to be doing this outreach, how do we become more efficient and effective at it? And we just, in the last little bit, we've just kind of figured it out to a certain degree, is that you need to know the industry, you need to know the geography, and you need to know exactly the size of the businesses you're going after, so you can then take that broad data set, narrow it down to something more specific, so that you can then do what Jessica's talking about. Because thinking about going and doing the research on every single business owner is like boils your mind. Like there's no way you could ever do it unless you've already curated that list down to call it 100. And then all of a sudden it makes sense to do that work. So that's probably number one, just kind of really thinking about your niche, what's going to be the right one to target, so you can get that really good quality list, so you can put more care into them. The second thing that I run into on the other side when like interviewing searchers myself, basically as potential buyers for businesses that we're selling, that they don't know and don't think about as much, is that the business owner, the business they built a family, they built this company, but along the way, they've actually built themselves. So they built themselves as entrepreneurs and they built themselves as leaders. And when they're meeting with a searcher, they're basically trying to determine, have you made it to the level that I am at in the leadership game, that you can now look after my family? Like they're actually trying to figure that out, right, on the call. And I'll have entrepreneurs or searchers that are coming and looking at businesses that we have, and maybe this is like a $5 million or $10 million revenue company, and their experience in life has brought them to the point where they could probably manage maybe a $2 million company, and they're basically punching outside of their weight class. And I say to them, there's no, like, you're not, like, probability of winning is almost zero here, because the entrepreneur that owns the business is really looking to you as like, is this the leader who is going to be able to effectively and efficiently run my company? And especially if they have to put some skin in the game, if there's a vendor node, if there's some earn-out component or whatever, they're going to be relying on you to make sure that that comes through in the future. So that's, I give this feedback sometimes to people, and I don't want it to come off as like rude or anything, but you kind of want to find a business that's like just beyond like your skill set. So if you're comfortable working with teams of 10, or if you're comfortable working with teams of 15, or whatever it might be, great. Like buy a company that has that many people in it, because that's your, like, what you're good at, or stretch a little bit. But filling that gap between, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to buy a $45 million revenue company out of the gates, and I've never run a business before, or I've never run a team before. The hardest part of that piece of the search is going to be convincing the entrepreneur that you can actually do it. And these people are savvy because they've been in battle for the last like 30 years, right? They know. So anyway, that would be two pieces that could maybe be helpful.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And Jessica, thank you for giving us that answer early in the podcast, because now our eye level is going to be just perfect.
It's phenomenal.
Looking right at my camera, yeah.
So obviously, both of you are located in Canada. What's one thing that you wish U.S. and international audiences would know about Canadian search? And what do you think makes Canadian search different from searching in other places?
I can hit on it if you want.
Yeah, Scott, why don't you go first? Because I know you're doing some international deals as well.
Yeah. Like we do sell a fair bit of stuff to business from the U.S. This morning I was in a call. We had and there's like 12 people in this call. It's a circus, with all the, and most of it was U.S. based that are looking to buy and acquire a business in Canada. The Canadian market is interesting because it is not as developed as the U.S. market. It just hasn't. It doesn't have as many people in it. So when you're looking at businesses, and specifically this, where we're doing a fair bit of work right now, which is the HVAC sector, if you're looking for a company that's doing one specific thing, like for instance, like it just services residential customers, you may not find that in Canada, because a lot of Canadian towns, cities, they aren't of the scale that a business can like super narrow down on like one specific thing. There's just not enough volume for them to provide service to. So they need to do multiple things. Like a prime example is me in this bumpkin town that I live in. It's called Revelstoke, BC. And for those people that ski, they'll know it. But if they heli ski or whatever. But when I started my company here as a property management company, we had to do long-term rental, short-term rental, all the low-income housing, like everything, just to get a business to a size that it was sustainable and could actually provide a decent amount of EBITDA. And that's something that the U.S. market, when they're coming and looking at Canada or other, like we're actually doing a deal in St. Lucia right now too, but they have to kind of think about that, understanding that the market just isn't as big. And because of that, the businesses might look a little bit different. Like they might be in more doing more segments than you would naturally see in like another in the industry in the US, because they just have to have reached the size.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Jessica, anything to add?
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that you would, to build on the idea that we're less developed, it's also much newer in Canada. Like this has been happening for a long time, buying and selling businesses, but it is absolutely not the same development that is you would see, for example, in the States. And I know this recently, Josh, I saw you, I was in Texas and I was speaking to someone and I opened up I began to try and explain what I do, because I find that still in Canada, whether I'm talking to a business owner or whether I'm talking to, I don't know, like a relative, they have no idea what search is. Whereas it's like a household common like conversation in the States. So it's relatively new. So there's an education piece that needs to go along with almost every owner I speak to. And then they're also, I would say one of the nuances too is they relax a little bit when they hear about Canadian searchers. And this is nothing to, our friends in the States, but a lot of the conversations that I have, if they I get emails every single week, but I don't answer them because they're from someone in the States. So and that's not the case for everyone. Of course, people are buying and selling within Canada, but that seems to be a common theme that I see with Canadian owners is there's also the approach. They love the really polite, maybe a little like throwback to Scott, ladies first. That's a very Canadian approach. And I find that how you approach the Canadian business owner matters a lot too. That's how they expect. So I would say that there's nuances there. So if you're an American searcher that is looking in Canada, there's some psychology behind it. So just make sure that you're aware of some of those patterns, and you might be able to unlock success in adapting that approach when you speak to owners.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, I just like to jump and kind of go along with that too. In any of this, you have to start, like I always start with somebody not knowing anything about it. And from what Jessica was saying, and I find this a lot too, like in the US when we're talking to business owners, certainly their doors been knocked on a bit more, but a competitive advantage the searcher can have is that everybody's knocking on the door, but no one's educating the owner on the process. Like this morning, we're doing a search in Florida and for tree service companies, right? And so I was talking with the founder, and business is too small for what we were looking for, but that's fine. I always like to provide people value when you're talking with them. And so I said, let me talk to you about what this landscape looks like. And I just walked them through. It's like, who's the different advisors you're going to be using in this? Like, who's the different players that are going to be knocking on your door, thinking about acquiring your company, and who are you most likely to sell to? That was a really nice conversation. They left and they were really thankful. And it's an example of business that I have no idea, right? And they'd be perfect tuck-in, perfect roll-up. It's not a platform company, but it would be good to just nurture that relationship. But I think the advantage, or at least what we can give back to the market, is educating them on this whole space, because they really don't know about it. They're day-to-day running their business. I've always found it's a nice way to build a relationship with someone too, is just give them value out of the gate so they understand things a little bit better. And half my job is just explaining to the business owner, it's more than half, I think, what it looks like when a private equity company is buying them and how the numbers look and this kind of stuff, and just getting them comfortable with it. Because what I've learned is no one can ever make a decision to do any activity, period. Like whether it's buying, selling, it doesn't matter unless they fully understand it. Like they have to fully understand it. Like call with my accountant the other day and we were changing some share structure. And I said, listen, we got to stop. I'm like, I can't even think about moving forward with this until I fully understand it. And you have not done your job of like describing to me that I understand it. Sure, you're talking your speak, but no, like I need to get this, because I feel like I said to them, I feel like I'm getting ripped off right now.
Right.
And I know you're not trying to rip me off, because like we've done lots of work with these people. I'm like, but I feel that way because I don't get what's going on here. Like slow it down. I just think that that's a big part of what we can bring to this, is getting people to understand so that they have the ability to move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that last point too, which is, we talk to buyers all the time who are like, well, I don't understand why, why do I have to follow that process? Or why is no one getting back to me? And it's often everyone's coming to the table and no one wants to get ripped off. There's incredible information asymmetry on both sides.
Mhm.
And the reason why these transactions are difficult, one of the main reasons is because there's a lot of natural distrust you have to get over in order to get a deal to close. So yeah, that's really helpful. And I'm gonna try something new today. The chat is open. Usually we ask for questions at the end, but if anyone has questions and they just want to throw a question out, we'll ask the questions a little later in the pod. But just I want to let everybody know that you are able to ask the guests questions. And so if you have questions, please put them in the chat right now. We'll get to them a little bit later. As we continue to go, in the United States, we obviously have the SBA 7A program. And I say obviously because on this podcast, at least, we spent a lot of time talking about the SBA 7A program. What does access to debt and capital look like for Canadian transactions in particular? And how are most buyers finding funding for their transactions? Jessica, as a traditional searcher, maybe you go first on this one.
Yeah, I was saying I could probably provide a little bit more of a general, and then Scott can add a bit more color, because I actually, just due to the fact that it is very similar to the fact that it's less common here for search than in the States, we actually have less access to capital than in the States. So I made the decision to actually go with a search fund for that reason. So as a traditional searcher, that's something that I don't need to worry about. But it also, for my non-funded friends who are self-funded, it is a challenge. And I give them all the kudos because there just isn't the same type of loans that are available. There aren't as many investors as in the States. So it's just truly a lot. It's an emerging field. I actually see in the future that this is going to strengthen and grow as people become more and more familiar with it. But we don't have that level of funding available. Scott, what else do you have to add?
I wish we had the SBA.
Me too.
I spent a lot of time in the U.S. I'm going to be in Kentucky here next week at the IBBA conference. But when you go to the International Business Broker Association conference, and there's probably, I don't know, like just a guess, like 115 vendors that are there. About half of them are banks, right? Because that just shows how developed that market is. And most of those banks are using the SBA lending as part of their program, right? And it is us Canadians, we look to it like, oh man, I wish we had that. So basically the way it works in Canada is we have our traditional banking institutions, and that's like your TD, your Scotias, your RBCs, like very much the banks that are in the US as well. But they're our big banks, and you're going to be able to get from them like a little bit over prime. So we just did we're doing a deal that's closing hopefully in 15 days, 20 days kind of thing. And it's 6.5% is what the business owner got through Scotiabank. Shout out to Scotiabank because they did a really good job of crushing it and done some good terms for this person. That's pretty darn good. Like that's really good. Because during coming right into COVID, the banks were doing more like 10% here, and that's what we were seeing. So we have the traditional banks. Then underneath the traditional banks, you have, not as much people care about this, but anyway, underneath the traditional banks, you have BDC, which is the Business Development Bank of Canada. That's as close as we get to an SBA program. And so BDC they're a subprime lender, and that you're going to be getting, if the banks are giving 6.5% Scotiabank, you're probably going to be getting 10 from them. So we had BDC kind of on the same deal give 10%. So we aren't using them because of that, but they have more favorable terms. So you usually don't have to put up your own house as collateral, like that kind of thing. You can get a loan from them that's unsecured. So that's how they support, and how the Canadian government supports the entrepreneur, is through that banking institution. And then from there, standard issue of your credit unions, and you have some other small lending partners that are in individual communities. But for the most part, a lot of the deals that we're doing, and certainly the size of deals that we're working with, a lot of the capital is coming from the U.S., to be honest with you. Yeah, which is like I'm happy about, right? So we have U.S. buyers that are coming in, and they're using some of the funding that they have there, or they're actually self-funded, and these buyers have their own money. Or Jessica's group, the group she works with, is great because they've already got their capital together, and so you're less worried about financing. For us, it's a big part of what we look at when we're we're going to work with a searcher, is that I call it 3 M's. It's like, do you have the money? Do you have the motivation, and do you have the management skill? Like those are the 3 M's that we're kind of screening for. And in Canada, the money piece is a little bit harder. Someone comes and goes, oh, I've got a bank that's going to loan to me. I'm like, okay, I need a bit more than that here.
Yeah.
Because we can't really guarantee that bank financing. So anyway, it's a long-winded answer on that one, but it's a little bit more of a struggle here.
No, that's a great answer. Do you find that more of the acquisitions are being done with private credit or with like equity investors than, like, is there still the kind of like vibrant, because I feel like here in the US, one of the models that has really skyrocketed, especially over the last 5 years, has been the self-funded model. Yep. Where there have been traditional search investors for a long time, 40 years or so, 50 years even. Like we're kind of in a semi-mature phase of traditional search. Those funds are very, very good at identifying talent, very good at raising money from LPs. The LPs understand the process, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But we also have this like nation and booming self-funded movement where, people are acquiring with, 100% seller financing and an SBA loan, or 10% down in an SBA loan, what have you. Do you find that it's because the interest rates are higher or because the terms are not, banks are less likely to lend? Is there a lot more investor activity in Canada for those transactions than there is in the US, in your opinion?
Sorry, to answer the last half of that question, like, is there more activity? I think there's more opportunity here because there's less activity. Like we've run, and this kind of deviates from the actual question, but it's probably relevant information. People that are listening, if you're thinking about acquiring something in Canada, we'll run search campaigns in the States and we'll run search campaigns in Canada for the same industries, and we will always do better in Canada. And the reason is, it might be partially because we're Canadian, right? And like Jessica touched on that before, it's like Canadian outreaching to Canadian, fine. Everyone likes working with someone that's like close to them in some way, geography wise. But I just think it's because people have been touched less. So they haven't had that, their rock hasn't been turned over as much, right? And so it's a new opportunity for them, and everyone always likes new. So that's part of it. The financing thing and the individual and the self-funded investor, there's definitely a lot of that that we see, but I don't think I haven't seen any major trend changes. Most people are still coming to the table where they're going to have used some of their finance, their own, like 30% of their own money or 20% of their own money, some banking funding, and then they're going to use some portion of vendor note. The full vendor with just using SBA and vendor and like coming with the zero down, that's not my world. Like if somebody's coming in, and this is maybe bad, but if someone comes in the first or fifth question they're asking is this seller going to be willing to put forward some money into this deal? I'm like, okay, like don't lead with that. That's a finance thing that's going to happen down the road. It's more like, okay, let's lead with what you can bring to this transaction from your skill set to run this business, like that kind of stuff. We'll figure out the financing down the road. Like that part is usually we're able to sort out. The other stuff's probably more important. And if you need money right out of the gates, you're already asking me for money in the first call. I'm like, go find money. Like money's not the hard part. Like the hard part's finding the deal and making sure that you can convince the owner to sell it to you. Like that's the actual challenge. But anyway, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So the three of us did a couple of introductory calls. I've chatted with each of you individually, and one thread that's come up a few times in each of these conversations is sort of the difference between buying like a single business and sort of I'm going to buy and operate this single business versus someone who is at various stages of a holdco, whether they're looking for that first platform company or they already have that platform company, they're buying a bunch of additional companies as they move forward. How do you think about this question about the difference between single business acquisition, multiple business acquisition from your respective angles in the industry?
You want me to jump on it, Jessica, just because the multiple thing, or you want to go?
Sure, you go first this time, and I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, it's the thing about the roll up that's nice is like once you land that platform, all the other stuff becomes available. It's like businesses that you'd never think about buying now become opportunities, right? Because you nail that platform, you're now in a market, and then you can look out and go, okay, this particular business has a weakness in this area. All right, let's acquire to like solve that problem. Or we need more staff. It's like, let's go acquire to more staff. Or there's like 30 kilometers away or 30 miles away, it's like there's another good market, and now we can stretch out to that through acquisition. And yeah, there's a business there that has EBITDA of 500,000, but fine, just bolt it on, right? So that, for me personally, I do like the consolidation strategy. I like that roll-up strategy because at the end of the day, for us in the business that I do day to day, it just brings more volume. Finding the platform's hard. Like that's going to be hard regardless. It's always going to be hard, right? Because you're dealing with like supply and demand, like number one issue, right? It's like there's low supply, lots of demand. So like when you can nail that down, it kind of opens up this whole sea of other opportunities that become available that wouldn't otherwise be. So that would be my answer to that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I'll tag on is because our angle is a regenerative business, that takes time. That's a timeline. So we're not traditional. We're not looking to flip it quickly. So by nature, every time I'm looking at it, it doesn't have to be multiple businesses, but I am always looking at what is the opportunity for this to be a platform company for me to continue to grow and develop, because I'm planning on holding this company and building it out just to make sure that I have maximum impact and I can develop out that purpose. So that is something that's really important to me and definitely a strategy that I take when I look at businesses.
Fantastic. So Jessica, in addition to searching for a small business, you are also a professional triathlete, and you are the second professional athlete we've had on the podcast, but just a fascinating angle, distribution of time, level of discipline across both areas of your life. What made you pursue search in addition to athletics, and how does search fit into your busy training schedule?
It's funny. I would almost switch that. Like triathlon fits into my search. I've always been like career is central and I love it so much. I as a relatively new searcher, for me, I love the flexibility. So I've always done sports as long as I've been working. So for me, it's just a part of, health is a really important value for me. If I am going to be working at the best possible level, I'm also going to be healthy. I'm going to be active, and that brings me energy. People ask how I have energy to do triathlon and search. It's because I do triathlon. I wake up every morning, I do my training, and then, I start my day at the same time as everyone else, but I have had that activity. For me, there's actually so many intersections between, training as a professional athlete and doing search. For one, I'm really used to putting in a lot of work and not seeing immediate results. And just knowing, do the reps, like just get it in. And you just understand that the minor setbacks don't hold you back as much. You're used to just getting back out there. And as bizarre as this sounds, competing in the professional level is actually a lot easier to integrate into search than the amateur level, because I do not need to pay for races. So say that I have a big race weekend coming up and I have an owner of a business that I really need to go visit. I can cancel that race, no problem, just jump into the next one. So it adds a lot more flexibility. It also helps me make sure, time expands to whatever, or work expands to whatever time you allow. So it helps me be really efficient and really focused in my search. I still do like a standard 40, 50 hour search work week, but it like heavy on the weekends, and it integrates because I have passion for both. It's equal and opposing passions, and I integrate lessons from triathlon into search.
Fantastic. Scott, do you work with a lot of athletes, and do you see that discipline that Jessica's talking about come through when you talk to athletes?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Jessica and then thinking about my life. It's like I'm like the fattest guy in my life right now. So I did sport when I was younger, like I was a pro wakeboarder for a little bit, like a lot of it. But anyhow, it's just like so far past me now, and that I'm just, that part of my life is that I'm not the guy that sits at my desk. It's brutal, just brutal. So I'm envious that you're getting exercise right now. And also, you add in a year and a half and a 3.5-year-old kid, and it's like it kind of goes away, which is too bad. So I need to get my exercise back in my life, is what I'm learning from this podcast. But anyway, to get my energy back. Anyway, no, actually, Russell Brunson probably, Josh, like you run across his stuff, like ClickFunnels guy.
Yeah, I have it, but yeah. What about it? Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so he's like an internet dude, like whatever. And I've been part of his program and drinking. I say I drink a lot of these like online guys juice, right? Like I'll get on the sauce. But anyway, so he was one of these guys that joined his like 2 comma club and whatever. And he's actually a really good guy. But their avatar that when they target someone who's going to be successful at the end of the day, that is actually going to make it through their program, they target people that were athletes in their career. Like even if it was amateur, pro, fine, doesn't matter. But because they have that discipline, I think maybe what Jessica says, like you put in effort for extended period of times, then you like it's 5 years, 10-year timeline to actually achieve your result, and that's just a part of the DNA. So,
yeah, I had a former boss that his whole thing was not just athletics, but just disciplined work at a particular craft, and it almost didn't matter what the craft was. So I would for a few years, I sat between, on my right, I had a professional bodybuilder, and on my left, I had like a top 1,000 chess player. And those guys were just like crazy dedicated, but not professional athletes, not like that level of success, but certainly that level of like dedication and thoughtfulness and like discipline. So I makes a lot of sense.
Don't sell your CrossFit short.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could mention if I was any good, but you know, that's a different life, I guess, right? Scott, so you and I have spoken in the past about the use of technology to enhance your work on the sell side and on the buy side. Where do you think the industry is headed technology-wise, and how can people more effectively use technology in the space?
Yeah, okay. The latter, yes, I can answer for sure. I mean, AI, the former of like where it's going, I don't know. Like, I don't have a huge crystal ball on that. I can tell you what we're doing to leverage stuff, but it improves your speed. Like, so we've spent the last, like, I've actually spent the last, I would say 6 years really developing tech for the M&A industry. My background's computer engineering, so I have that kind of in me. It's like, oh, this needs to be fixed up. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I was at a conference with a guy that mostly focuses on automation, and we're both standing there and we're like, wow, we could disrupt this like big time, right? So I actually sat down. I locked myself in a hotel for a weekend. Sat down, made this massive map as far as like running an M&A deal and all the technology they could use along the road. And it's funny, like we built that now with me and one other guy in my office, pretty much. And it's more 100% of his job now and less 100% of mine. But there was a while that's all I was doing, and we dusted off that map the other day that I put together in the hotel. And we're like, wow, we've actually built this thing. Like, it's pretty much done, which is incredible. But
Awesome.
it really breaks down into kind of like 3 big blocks. It's like you're looking at first finding the opportunity, right? And like, what's the technology that you can use there to find the opportunity, which is more like appealing to your audience, probably that conversation. And that is, again, you got to know about the industry you're targeting. But right now, and I'll dig into the weeds because people probably would want that, I think, is that so what we do first is we just use a Google plugin app to go through and find the industry. So we know the industry. So for instance, this is what we're doing today. We're doing pool services in Ontario, like it's kind of outside of Toronto, right? So, all right, pool services in Ontario. So then we're going to use a Google plugin, which is easy enough to find, that just scrapes Google Maps to like pool services companies. Boom, then you get everything, right? So that technology is massive for service-based businesses to find, because you can just get everything right in one go. And so now I've got called 1,200 companies, right? But then the challenge is, all right, how do I get the owners' names of those 1,200 companies, right? So we use like Seamless.ai, we use Phantom Buster, we use some other tools. We just buy database wise. You're also using LinkedIn and plugging LinkedIn to kind of connect those dots and those businesses. But a lot of that is just brute force. Like, there's nothing really great right now. The main tool that we found that actually moved forward in the last year and a half is Clay, CLAY. And Clay's really great. And Jessica's nodding her head, so she might know it. But Clay's really good for building out AI automation. So now that I have a list of all the businesses that are in the area that I'm targeting and the industry that I'm targeting, Clay can go through, and we use Clay and we program Clay out to then go and say, okay, we want you to visit the website of that business, count the number of pages that are on that website, count the number of team members that they're listing team members, find the owner's name if it's there, and Clay will do all that. And then Clay bubble sorts so that we have the businesses by size as best as it's proxy, but it's as best as possible, right? So that beginning, called part 1 of your technology, is like finding the opportunities, finding the business owner's name. maybe part two, a little bit of that, could call it 1B maybe, is outreaching to that business owner. So there's lots of different tools you can use for outreaching en masse or outreaching like 100 at a time, that kind of thing. And you can play around with those, and some new ones we're playing around with that are working well. But it's all about getting that, and your searchers know this, but it's all about getting the email to resonate, email to connect, getting that open and kind of connecting with the business owner. So that's part one. But then you're done. And then for us in our business, part one is kind of, you better have part one, because part two and part three are like kind of the actual hard parts, right?
Yeah.
So part two is now I got to bring that business owner through the journey of like making them a lead to a prospect, to building relationships, to then getting to the point where they're actually going to sign an agreement with us and go to sell their business. So we built technology out all the way along the road that basically builds trust, kind of gives them value all the way, so they're going to use our firm versus using other firms, and then get them to the position where we can take them to market. Then after that, your third thing is the technology that's going to manage the deal. So now you're talking about project management, and project management of managing the deal is complex. Like, it's like now you have multiple parties involved in this, and you've got lawyers, and you've got accountants, and you've got a family member that wants to poke their head into it, and like all this stuff. So you're managing all these personalities and the project, and you're also managing data collection, and you're managing diligence, and you're managing LOIs, and all the rest of that. So there's a lot of tech that kind of goes into that, all the way through the system. And I just think at every spot, as much as you can have automation in there, and as much as you can have the proper data collection and all of it, it just speeds the process up. Because for us, it was worth that time. Because at the time, like 4 years ago, kind of when I started this journey, I could probably reasonably do like 4 deals a year, but I wanted to be able to do 100. So I'm like 4 to 100, it's completely different. So it's like, okay, we got to build a whole bunch of a tech stack. And all the back end of our system, we've actually used Zoho to build it out. And for those that are aware of Zoho, and it's been phenomenal. We've tried a whole bunch of different tools. Great thing about Zoho is you can do whatever you want with it. Bad thing about it is you got to build it. So it's like, it's the trade-off, right? Whereas you get HubSpot, okay, great, HubSpot's good, kind of out of the box, but like adding extra features to it is difficult, right? So yeah, that's the full in the weeds. There you go.
Cool. Thank you for digging in. That was super helpful. I'm sure our listeners got a lot of value out of that.
Yeah.
Jessica, maybe a slightly different angle on the same question. What technology are you using in your stack right now for your search? And is there anything that you see you're excited about, or that you see some of your fellow searchers using that you'd like to try?
Yeah. Well, I was nodding vigorously with Clay because I've seen it and really want to like get my hands in it and play around with it. But my key platform that I use for search is Apollo. And so that's sort of initial. It's really helpful to get that number. And I actually, as I've gotten better, I'm drilling down to the point where how did you get my cell phone number? So it's, again, because search is so new, they're not used to being reached out to from searchers in that way. I do use plugins for Google as well, just to try, because I find that Apollo doesn't do the full breadth of what I need. It misses companies, and I want to make sure I get them all. So do that. And then for my CRM, I use HubSpot, and it's taken some time, but wrapped my head around it, and I find it really useful. It just keeps me on track. I find that automating, to Scott's point, as much as possible, the balance is not automating the human out of it. You need to make sure that it's personalized, but to Scott's point, it also is a numbers game. So you got to move things through as quickly as possible. So those are some of the things that I use. I sometimes even play around with ChatGPT in the way that I will ask it questions of, here are the businesses, or give me a list of owners that would be ready to sell based on these criteria. They actually have spit out businesses that when I contact them say, yes, I've actually been thinking of this. So using existing technology, they'll say, okay, it runs through, this business has been owned by one individual. It's been in business for 40 plus years. It can tee all of those things up for you and shorten your search. So there's some creative ways that you can use ChatGPT as well.
Yeah. That's killer. I love
that. Yeah. It's always open, one of my tabs.
I've tried using ChatGPT for this, and I found a lot of ways that maybe I'm a bad prompt engineer. So, we could take this with a grain of salt. I find that it doesn't always give I find that I get a lot of hallucinations when I'm asking them for specific business names, but that's, that could be my own prompt engineering weakness coming out. So I'll have to ask our Private Market Labs tech team about that. So, but anyway, thank you for those answers. For the audience, we are ready for questions. We've been ready for questions. If y'all have any questions for our guests, please put them in the chat. We'll answer them live. I have one or two more questions for Scott and Jessica, and so now is your time. So obviously, both of you have a unique perspective on the SMB M&A market. I can't believe we're in May. I've been asking this. I started asking this question in January. It's like, what's going to happen in 2024? So I'm going to tweak it a little bit. What's kind of in your crystal ball right now? And, what do you see coming down the pipe in terms of the next trend in small business M&A? Jessica, you want to go first with that?
Sure. And I wouldn't say it as much of a trend, but I'm gonna tailor it specifically for Canadian search. I think that they're going to get more savvy. I think that the business owners are going to be reached out more often. Right now, Canada is comparative to the States, a bit of the Wild West in terms of owners are not used to be reached out to. I'll share this, Josh, because when we were having coffee, your jaw dropped. I'm averaging at least one business owner reaching out to me about a month. I put it out on LinkedIn that I'm looking, and they were like, oh, you're selling a business. Would you buy mine? And they end up being really good businesses too. So it's so new that I think I see that changing. So it's a really ripe environment, I find, for Canadian searchers. Again, I don't want to oversimplify it or make it seem like it's the easiest thing. Like you can just go and pick a business, because Scott can easily say it's a lot more complex than that. But I do say that I see that a trend of Canadian businesses becoming more used to searchers reaching out. And I see it actually getting harder to crack into as we go forward. So the time's now.
Time is now.
Yeah, I don't know. I hope that the trend is consolidation, because that's what we want to. We're banking on that a little bit. Like that's what we're building our stuff out for. But there just hasn't really been a lot of that done in industries in Canada. So yeah, I feel that trend will happen moving forward. We'll see the trend of people exiting. There's this, the gray hair tsunami or whatever, all the baby boomers exiting. That's interesting, because I find that everyone thought it was going to happen all at one time. It's not. It's like a lot of the business owners that we'll work with are 75. So it's like maybe 10 years ago, you should have thought about exiting, but they'll exit when they want to exit. And I don't think it's going to be as much of a wave as people think. So that's just my 2 cents on that piece. Other than that, I think it's going to stay the same. I think interest rates are going to just do what they're doing right now. I don't think there's going to be any major changes there on the go forward. But these are all crystal balls that none of us can really predict.
Sure.
But I can tell you what we're going to do. Work hard. That's what I'm going to do. And we're going to talk to more business owners, and we're going to sell more companies than we've ever sold before. So I don't care what the market's doing.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
One of the pieces of advice we got when we did, this is, like I said, this is part 2 of international SMB M&A. In part 1, one of the key insights from our guest was don't be a tourist in the market where you're searching, which means, if his context was Asia. So if you're going to buy a business in Singapore, you need to have context and contacts in Singapore and understand the culture, the customs, have contacts on the inside. Would you give similar advice for someone in the United States looking to buy a business in Canada? And what does not being a tourist in Canadian search look like?
I don't know. I can jump. So I agree. Yes. My answer to that's yes. It's very nuanced. Like we're another state. Like at the end of the day, right? It's just people that maybe look over it, and it is a good opportunity. There's lots of good opportunities here for sure. I don't think you need to do too much work that's different from what people are doing right now. But it is nice to have somebody local. Right now, we're investing a fair bit of money from a firm out of Texas, but they have 2 local partners they're working with here. And so when someone asks us, it's like, is this fund local? It's like, yes, it's Canadian. It's all Canadian based. The money's coming from the US, because my story is that's where all the money is anyway. So it's got to come from there. And then, but it's being invested through Canada, through a Canadian entity. That actually makes a big difference in the Canadian market. So it's one small change, and it's getting one person that's local that understands what's going on. But I think that's no different than anything. And I was probably 2 years ago, I was at a conference, and my whole goal of that conference was to figure out, okay, how do I sell bigger businesses? How do I get in touch with bigger companies? And one of the guys I talked to said, you just need a consultant on your team that understands that industry. So you don't need to come understand that industry from the beginning. But if you walk into that door and you have somebody that's worked in that industry for the last 35 years and is known in that space, to kind of like bringing your little celebrity with you, that will help convert, right? Of course, that makes sense. So being educated in the industry you're going after, and this is what you can get burned really quick. And this is why narrowing down on the industry you're trying to go after, I think, is incredibly important, because then you can educate yourself in that particular industry and show up as someone who has some experience, and then hire someone, or at least get coached by someone who has industry experience. I think that's no different than geography and country, right? So you just have to know a little bit there, or at least be with someone that knows a fair bit there, and that's going to cover your base.
Yeah, I would echo everything you said, Scott. It's so perfect. Like personalization and regionalization is so important in this. And I think the sooner, like for me as a searcher, getting very crystal clear on my industry. For instance, I know in long-term care, I know that that's an area of search that is hugely interesting to searchers. I'm just pulling that as an example, but that industry is so tight. So if you're looking for that, you need to come in, you need to build those relationships. And the sooner that you can do that, the better. So I echo that, getting crystal clear on your focus and just going in there and building genuine relationships. And then echoing that regionality does matter. If you are searching in Canada and you're not Canadian, finding someone Canadian to partner with, at least to make a warm lead or an introduction, is really important.
Awesome. Well, I think we're about at time, and we don't have questions. Y'all were really thorough in your answers. So thank you so much for joining me. This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to all of our listeners of the last 30 episodes of Private Market Insights. Here's to the next group of 30, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Josh, thanks so much. Thanks to Private Market Lab.
Thanks for having us.